Welcome to the Funnel Reboot Podcast, brought to you by Marketing What's New. Let's get into today's show.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot. Today, we're diving into how to make great visualizations. Now, this is episode 121, and it ends a series which focuses on where this industry is going with analytics and AI. I hope you caught the talks by previous speakers like the head of a think tank, an analytics professional, and 2 Googlers. If you didn't catch them, I'd encourage you to go do that, and a link will be provided in this episode's description. Let's go to today's show. No exploration of analytics is complete without talking about how to visualize data. A picture's worth 1,000 words, right? In the past, when data was in a spreadsheet, it only took hitting that chart button to render some numbers visually. But for many of us, this experience has moved to a browser, where we build our own report, either in an interface like Google Analytics or in a standalone visualization tool. I'm talking with someone who's really good at a certain visualization tool, but he came by his power user status in a roundabout way. He was born and raised in Hawaii. After he got his marketing degree, he worked at an ad agency where he did everything from videography to writing Facebook and Google ads. That, and building a few websites on his own, stoked his curiosity for how the tagging and the analytics behind all these things worked. He didn't just want to get at raw data, he wanted actionable data. He felt that to optimize his marketing, if he only knew how to present visitor behavior visually, the answer would be apparent, even obvious. He went down YouTube rabbit holes, asked around at conferences, and eventually landed on the beta of Google Data Studio, now called Looker Studio. And that's the visualization tool that we're going to talk about today with JJ Reynolds, who joins us from Reno, Nevada. I'm so glad to welcome JJ Reynolds. Welcome to the show, JJ.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Glenn.
Can you tell me, just start us off with what the name of your company is and your own title?
Yeah, so I run the team over at Media Authentic, and my title is I'm the founder, and wear many hats on that front. I can change my title depending on who I'm talking to, but I'm the founder and the chief of, operations / everything else. So
you got it. Yeah, I know what that's like. Today we're going to talk about visualizing, and we're going to talk about many of the new things, or relatively new things, that modern marketers can use to make this a lot easier, but also to do it a lot better. And this is part of a series where we've been speaking with analytics people. We've been speaking with people who really understand the data science aspect of how to do this. You're going to help us understand a little bit of this crucial piece that comes as we're analyzing the data and we're preparing to share it with others to make sense of it and to give us approval to take some action, right? That's where we want to get to. So can you maybe tell me a little bit of your journey of how visualization has been something that, you have come to make a mainstay of what you do?
Yeah, so I just kind of stumbled into it, honestly. I began originally as a media buyer. I moved into kind of the data collection aspect of kind of rocking Google Tag Manager, as well as the analytics platforms there, kind of browser-based measurement for everyone who wants to get a little bit technical with it. And then slowly navigated into having a team around people that we just do that measurement of really intense data collection systems. And then that ultimately turned into, whoa, we have too much data. It's too easy to collect this information now. We need to start culling the crop and diving into just the pieces that matter. And usually that's done in the final visualization. So now, like the classic iceberg approach, right? Of what's under the water is 80% is what you don't see, or whatever the percentages that some marketer wants to give you about an iceberg. Is totally true, where most people only look at the visualization that you see above the water, but they don't see all of the work that goes into the that's under the water, or
all of the data. So let's imagine that we are using that data in Excel or Google Sheets. Am I right that we are hitting a point where there's too much data for those tools, or where those tools, maybe they have a little piece to play in the overall scheme of things, but they're not now the kitchen sink. They no longer should be handling the data collection and the analysis and the visualization?
It all comes down to what you're trying to do. And I am not one to badmouth someone who's rocking a Google Sheet. I've seen 7 and 8 figure businesses that run off of a VA and a Google Sheet. That is not something I'm like ever knocking. Like, so if you're rocking a Google Sheet and you like your Google Sheet and you are comfortable in that and it gets you where you want to go, don't listen to me because you're doing something and you're just working, right? If you're not happy, or it's taking like 20 hours of your week, or you haven't figured out a way to do it, then keep listening. So that's the caveat I want to give to this, is I'm not going to knock a Google Sheet just because it's a Google Sheet or an Excel doc, whatever you're using. But what we want to think about is, how are we aggregating something? And the word aggregation, I just want to define as math. Okay. So addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, whatever it might be. And I'm going to give the best example I know how to do this is users. So in the Google Sheet, say you want to export like Facebook ads or Google Analytics, does not choose the platform that applies to you.
Yep.
What you could see then is like, for example, say you wanted to have the number of amount you spent per day and the number of visitors to your site per day.
Right. Okay?
So we've already chosen in our mind a mental aggregation of, we're aggregating it by day. So we've added up every single second, minute, hour to get a single cell of one day. We've added up all of the cents, right? Because we now have all of those things. And we've also added up all of the users. There's no user ID. That is, every individual user is like, we've got user 1, user 2, user 3. We don't know like the unique string or however we're identifying what a user is.
We're just counting.
By doing that, right, we're in this Google Sheet. We've already chosen where to aggregate that. So now in our Google Sheet, we're stuck with that aggregation being at a day. Mm-hmm. And where that comes into play now is, if I wanted to know the frequency of users that saw the ads versus landing pages over a week, we cannot do that because we don't know how many users which users made up that aggregation. It could be unique people every single day, or it could be the same number of people. So that's like the example I love to use as far as when Google Sheets can start to break down, because you have to aggregate it most of the time with any volume. Because if you actually had 10,000 users who saw your ads, you can't have 10,000 rows per day. You'll run out of space real quick.
Or is it fair to also say that you need to have a small enough number of data points, rows, that you can use that very unit of measure on one of the axes of your chart, right? Because that's, the chart is saying to you, I want days. And if your data is down to the second, that chart's not going to understand that seconds go into minutes, go into hours that become days. So
that's the beauty. That's the beauty of data visualization. And like, specifically when I say data visualization, I want to refer to Data Studio as the tool. So that's kind of just so everyone is on the same page. So there's a bajillion of the different options. But you can actually decide how you want to aggregate it later.
That's right.
Like that's the beauty of like kind of in those visualizations, is that you can then say, I have this chart that the original raw data that we have in this Google Sheet or in BigQuery, or if you're getting fancy, whatever other type of server thing you want to do, I don't really care. Like the tools I don't really care about them. But the visualization is where you then get to make those decisions about how you're going to aggregate something so that you can take an action. Because
That's right.
all of the nerdy talk that I just spoke about of aggregations and BigQuery and Sheets doesn't matter, like in my opinion. It's what everyone loves to get like really nerdy about. But at the end of the day, it's like, can you take an action on it? And that's why like I don't knock the person who's rocking a Google Sheet that they add to every week, because they're taking actions more than the person who spent 6 months trying to build a pipeline to then look at and they're like, I don't know what to do.
Yes. So oftentimes people can get more elaborate. So credit where it's due. Spreadsheets are possibly the most wonderful creation that, one of the best things that's ever come out of technology because of its flexibility. But your point, as I take it, is there have always been separate steps here, that the data aggregation is a step and the visualization is a step. And when we step over to a tool like Data Studio instead of the spreadsheets charts, we have teased those two things apart. And by doing so, we can now let each tool act as best of breed. As you say, we don't really care where the data is coming from. We'll use the best of breed tools for that. But when it comes to visualization, start to see that there is a category of tools like Data Studio that's really good at what it does.
Exactly. And that's usually like the clients we work with, it comes down to how the people we want to talk to want to view something. Because you can have the same information in a table that's also in a chart, that's also in a graph, that's also in everything else. And so if you're listening to this and you're like, whoa, what's happening? I would implore you, I would suggest is that you try to ask yourself, who is looking at this? Because that's going to usually help you get to an actionable report quicker than deciding what you want to. I've seen time and time again where Google Ads agencies send a report to a client with like every possible KPI that they can get out of the thing onto a dashboard. And I'm like, who cares what this number is unless you're the actual media buyer? Like the client doesn't care. They can't do anything with this number that they don't even know what the abbreviation of like CWT means or whatever they decided to abbreviate something to. And so if you can put yourself in that mindset of who's viewing it, it's going to be much, much more applicable. And you'll probably get much better responses from your clients or even your teammates, right? Oftentimes you can have a roll-up report for if you are a media buyer and you're building a report for the manager, or if you're the manager, you're building a report for like the owner, right? Like those are going to be different styles of reports that you can start losing visibility into if you don't do it right. So
let's take that report builder, let's become that person for a minute. And I think our comments, while we are going to be talking about Data Studio, I want any listeners who have Power BI or Tableau or some other tool that's similar. I'm going to take a bet here that they have similar things, maybe with different names, but the same thing. So if I can, I'm going to just pelt you with a couple of quick we need to know about Data Studio just to get familiar with it. So let's start off first with some of the things that it's going to expect us to have a handle on. Data source. What does it mean in Data Studio when the very first thing I'm asked for is a data source?
Yeah, so a data source is just where your data is coming from. And so there are a couple of options on that. There's a whole bunch of default data sources that Google Data Studio and like a lot of the tools will give you. So for example, like you can connect to Google Analytics. Like that's a default one because Google owns both Data Studio and Google Analytics. You can connect to YouTube Analytics. You can get to Google Ads. There's a whole bunch of defaults. Google Sheets. Those are all data sources. Then you can also have the option of paid connectors, where a company like, say, for example, like Supermetrics, Power My Analytics, there's a bajillion of them out there, and they can connect to other information where they build the models to get that information into your destination of Data Studio. So data source is literally a source of data, which is a terrible explanation, but it's where you're getting the information from out in the world.
Fair enough. But maybe a way I like to think of it is we have, in every spreadsheet, we normally have the A column, which has, here's what I've got. And then if it's time series, we normally put along the top B, C, and the rest of the columns, we put, I don't know, a date period or something. And then we have, figures in it. So the next thing that Data Studio is going to help us understand is that when it's looking at a data source, it's teasing those things apart. So it knows, for example, that row number 1 says impressions, and it knows that row number 2 says clicks. So it's not going to get the impressions and the clicks mixed up, but it wants us to tell it those things. Or maybe it has beneath those two, it has campaign name, right? These things we need to instruct it on because some of them are numbers, some of them are text, date, whatever that we have. So when we get into the data source, we do have to deal with a little bit of the formatting if it's not provided already, or we need to make sure that it is done right. So can you just maybe embellish a little bit on that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's only 2 types of information for 95% of people. There's something that's a dimension, and there's something that's called a metric. And the way I look at this is that metrics you do math to, and dimensions you say the word by. And how that works is, for example, say I want to know the population, and I tell you it's 7 billion. Well, that's the population of Earth. So now it's broken down by Earth. But say now I wanted to break it down by continent. So now you have whatever the continent's broken down. And then you can break it down by country, right? And then you can break it down by state, and then by city, and then by zip code, and then by township, right? So that word by, that I'm just saying by, is taking that metric and dividing it up into a smaller relation of things. So in general, right, what we want to do is we want to say, what buys do we need? Because I'm only looking at population. I have not even layered in by time. Like, is that this year? Is that in 1912? That is also that dimension. So in general, everything you want to think about is a number you can do math with, which Data Studio calls a metric, and a lot of other ones do as well. Or it is a dimension, which is something that you say by with, like, for example, country. You can say gender. So, there's so many things you can do, and that's like the easiest way I've found to explain it is that, like, those are the kind of 2 ways to do all of your data visualization.
And metrics, as that word suggests, are, let's just say, always numbers, right? So if in the population one, the way the data might have it, we've got the population number of Canada, of US, of Mexico. That's how it's sitting in the data source. You come along and say in Data Studio, show me a table. Okay, so it shows you a table, just a flat table, and it goes, Canada's got this many, US has this many, Mexico has this many. And then you do your dimension thing. You say, I want it by continent, and it says North America, and then it gives you the total of those 3. It's rolled them up into one row. Right. So that's the magic of not worrying about what kind of granularity the data is sitting in. Data Studio will just sum it up or group it or do whatever we need with, because it understands the relationship of those dimensions to the metrics.
Yeah. And that only works for like the few, like Google Analytics and other sorts of like default ones, because otherwise, you have to manually map those.
You have to teach it.
Like you have to manually say that this is within this country. So there is some level of like once you start getting more complex out of things, like
Yes.
those relationships are only known to those pieces. So again, very like technical as far as like what we're talking about, but at the end of the day, you have information, whatever service you're providing, whether it's building a website, whatever it might be. And if it would be more helpful to have that information relayed with other information, it might be something where you can use Data Studio to do that, or a visualization tool, because it just makes things so much easier to see at a high level and also be able to drill into it.
You were talking about things that Data Studio understands only about certain Google data sets. Would you agree that there is one other thing that Data Studio understands no matter which type of data you are putting into it, and that is date? So you can get very clever with saying, I want to know what last July's data set looked like. But then you can even use a relative date. Like you can say, show me what last month was. So it's looking at today's date and it knows we're in a new month. It's going to the last month and it'll update the following month with this month, right? So date is, I think, a special hack. I think that's where Data Studio shines compared to spreadsheet charts.
Yeah, well, it's just date is just a filter. And in Data Studio, you can add a ton of filters. It just happens to be that date is universal.
Right.
Because Facebook ads has a date and Google Analytics has a date. But nothing else is the same between those two platforms. So there's nothing else you could filter one time. But if you had, for example, 3 different data sets that all have country, like you could do the same thing with country. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And so like date just happens to be the most common one. But you can do that with literally any thing that has the exact same schema. It works. So
all
that's
right.
another beautiful piece of Data Studio.
Right. And a schema or schema is simply, like I was saying, it's that spreadsheet list, but what it's done is it's understood the A column, and it is being told what all of the things on that A column are, both the metrics and the dimensions within it. We're going to talk about those multiple data sets that you teased, but we're going to do that right after we have a quick break. We'll get right back to the conversation, but I'll first take a moment to talk about the switch Google's making to their whole analytics platform. There are many ways to move to Google Analytics 4 out there, and one of them that's included for free with GA4 is the web analytics data that you see in the interface, but in database form. And since you're going on a full-blown migration to a new product anyway, you should consider pulling in data from your other systems so that you can analyze and visualize them for your entire funnel. Now, you're going to have to learn some new things here, but you don't have to be overwhelmed by it when you have an expert personally guiding you. I'm going to be having these GA Fast Forward workshops as 2-day sessions where attendees leave with actual dashboard reports that show stakeholders the data that's tied to their business performance. So you can take advantage of this. And the next workshops are in Ottawa and Montreal. You can find information on them by going to gafastforward.com. So GA as in Google Analytics, and then the words fast forward. You can either use the number 4 in forward, or you can spell it all out. Either way, I'll get you there. Okay, JJ, we've gone through the things that we need to know as we're bringing data into Data Studio for, let's say, one data set. Tell us about, you mentioned using Google Ads and using Facebook Ads, but you said that they would be used together and perhaps on the same Data Studio workspace. How's that possible?
Yeah, so what you want to do is ask a question. And that's where everything starts with as far as asking a question. So if your question is, how much are we as a company spending per day? Okay, that could be a question that somebody asks because you have a dozen different places you're spending money, and you want to do all that. And say we just we're going to define spend by ad spend. What we can do is we can simply connect in Data Studio to all those different ad platforms that you're using. Most ad platforms have some sort of connection because they're used to have to exporting data. So again, the majority of the large connectors out there will connect to most anything, from like even the smaller ones like Criteo and AdRoll that you don't hear of that much. Mm-hmm. So those bigger questions of how much are we spending overall per day, that can be answered by, again, connecting to those data sources and building a report that answers your question. And the question is the most important piece to all of this, because everything that we're talking about that's like super nerdy of like dimensions and metrics and charts, etc., like it's not hard. Like it's not difficult. It's complicated sometimes, but it's not difficult. Like there's a pretty user interface. You're not having to write your own like custom program, right? It's not. But the question is the hard part, because again, that word "buy" is what I'm like really like. It's what is the bane of most people's existence. Yeah. Because if you ask me, hey JJ, how much do we spend on all of our ad platforms last week? And so one method of doing that is you go to Google Sheets and you export everything to Google Sheets for that time range, and you sum them all up, and then you just say, "Hey, Glenn, we spent $4,000."
Right, and the other person says, "I've got just one more question."
Yeah, and then you say, "Well, like which ad platform spent the most?" And now you have that word "buy," and I'll say break that down by ad platform. And now break that down by our top of funnel campaigns, our middle of funnel campaigns, and our bottom of funnel campaigns.
Exactly.
And how much did we spend on each of those? And so that word "buy" and the question that you ask is the most important part, because everything else is not complicated. It's just, or not difficult. It's just complicated, because you can complicate it with the amount of data you want in your question. But getting the actual information is you drag and drop. You kind of have to understand in the background what's happening. But if you don't ask a good question, like you're just kind of futzing around, because you don't really know what your end result is most of the time.
True. If you are trying to answer the question after question or modify your question, and you've done it with a data extract, though, you could hit a dead end. Where you need to go back and extract the data a different way. You don't have to do that as much if you're in a tool like Data Studio, where all of those relationships can simply be repurposed.
Yeah, it just depends. Like right now, we're just talking about the end result. We're talking about the top of the iceberg of making the visual. There are like so many different ways to get information where I call it like data wrangling. You can use like APIs. You can use like custom functions. You can use like Google Sheets to BigQuery. There's like so many ways to do it that like you either like that you then have to solve for these other problems.
Yes.
Like, you have to solve for a problem at some point. And so that's why the question is honestly what matters the most, because you could ask a question and I can build your report in 5 minutes and it satisfies your question. Or you ask a really complicated question that I'm like, okay, we have to wrangle all this stuff in a unique way to get the specific thing. How do we identify what's the top of funnel campaign? How do we identify what is this thing? Do you want top of funnel campaign by campaign or ad set or ad group or ad name? Like, there's so many ways that you have to ask that question. And so the better the question is, the better you're going to be able to get an actionable answer.
Yeah, and this isn't, that Wrangler kind of sounds like a Old West thing. We don't want to think of them as a Lone Ranger, though. They need to come into the town. They need to mingle with their fellow kin. And in the case of your campaign with, top of funnel, middle of funnel, it would really be wise for them to work with the people who make those campaigns, because maybe those people could come up with a naming convention. And if it's done consistently, then when that data comes into Data Studio, it's very clear how the Facebook ads and the Google ads pair up together. So there's more than enough for a team effort here. But let's just kind of take that scenario, JJ. we've hinted at joining different data sets together. How do we do that in Data Studio?
So there's a couple of methods. If you're going to actually do a true join, which for everyone who doesn't play SQL at home, a join is basically combining two different pieces of information that have a relation together. And like I just used a bunch of words that you're like, whoa, back it up. What? The best way to describe this is imagine that you're in an auditorium and you say, hey, everybody, separate out by people who are wearing long sleeve shirts and short sleeve shirts.
Okay.
And you get everyone to separate on the side. So now you have two data sets. You've got long sleeve shirts and you've got short sleeve shirts. So imagine that's like your Google ads on one side and your Facebook ads on the other side.
Yep.
And then you're going to say, all right, we're going to make this new combined system. And how are we going to combine these two different people of long sleeve and short sleeve together? Let's do it by color. So now everybody who's wearing red on the short sleeve shirts, you're going to combine into the other side of the auditorium with the red of the long sleeve shirts. We just chose a rationale to combine off of color.
Sure.
That's what we decided. And so that logic choice is what we did. So in Data Studio, you have the ability to do something that's called like data blending, which is deciding how you're going to join those things together. That's where things start getting, you have to understand like all of the processes behind it, because you can get yourself in a real pickle real quickly if you don't understand what you're doing when you blend something together.
But on the bright side, there's a very intuitive thing that people have learned even in grade school that is used inside of these tools to show you how you're doing a join. Venn diagrams.
Yeah, there's Venn diagrams all day long, but you have to understand. Like this is I field conversations all the time with people in Data Studio, and 95% of the time, this is the problem. And I've tried a bajillion ways, not even a million, an actual bajillion of ways to explain how this works, and those Venn diagrams do not help every time I've tried. And so the way that you have to do it is you have to understand the actual data that you're looking at, even though it's in a pretty UI. Like you need to remember everything is a table. Everything is the Google sheet that you were referencing.
Yes. Behind the scenes, it's, if we peel maybe one layer deeper, the words that start to be used are include, exclude, and, or, not. Right. So wherever people feel comfortable, they can use, those circles. They can use those operator words. But your point is completely taken that they've really got to understand what they're mixing. If you are back in the auditorium and all of a sudden, you blindfold yourself and you start, naming things that people aren't wearing, or, you start getting all, you throw pants into the mix, you can, as you say, get yourself into a real muddle. So if you know what you're doing, though, I think the real point of it is that whole aggregating and summarizing so that someone in a moment can glance at something and say, I get it. Blending is just another handy method with multiple data sources to get to that end result.
Yeah, and and we've talked a lot of ambiguity. So here's a real example of like blending in real life is you have one data source of your CRM data.
Sure.
And your CRM contains, let's just say it has 4 fields. Let's just say it has the date the contact was created, the email address that they, that it's in their CRM, their what method they came in, right? Was it like a cheat sheet? Was it a white label? Was it like a white paper? Was it a free trial? What method they came in? And then the last field is like, let's just say where they're located in the world, okay? By city. On another data set, you've got your Stripe data or payment processing data. And in that one, what you have is the transaction date. You then have their email address, and you have the amount that they were purchased and what they actually bought.
Yep.
So now you're going to say, how am I going to combine these things together? And in Data Studio, it's not very clear. Like you have to decide, how am I going to combine these together? And if you're going to do this at home, I'll tell you right now, it's going to be a left outer join. And that's what you're going to do when you blend it. And you're going to make sure that your CRM data is on the left and your Stripe data is on the right. And you're going to do the left outer join. That is not intuitive. Like that's where like everybody who
really.
This is it's so simple. And I'm like, no, it's not. Because you have to know that I'm going to literally join the payment information onto the CRM information.
Only for those customers that bought,
And then we're going to do some math and calculate the date between the date record creation date and the purchase date. And we're going to use a date difference function in Data Studio. So like all of that, very easy for me. I can do that very quickly because I know how to do it. But for the average person, it's going to be a little bit of a learning. But once you learn, it's not like you're coding. You're not like actually having to rebuild this every time.
No.
It's a couple of clicks. And once you have the information, like 20 minutes, and you've got a report that is answering how long it takes the average lead to purchase broken down by the entry point of those leads. And so that's the beauty of it. And it can get really scary when you're in there and you're like, why am I seeing errors? And once you start doing more complicated things like I'm mentioning, as opposed to just beautiful charts that everyone likes to tote around the internet, that's where the beauty is of Data Studio. And the beauty is of a true visualization tool where you're asking good questions, have a good system, and then a good outcome.
Yeah, completely. And the tool itself, just like our good old friend, Spreadsheets, it goes all the way from that noob to a full-time professional analyst. Data Studio isn't going to put analysts out of work. It has features that are used all along that spectrum. But I think the important thing that even a novice would appreciate is not censoring their question because they're not sure if it can do it or not. It can do it. So let that question float, as you daydream of what you would like to see as a marketer to help you do your job. And yes, whether it's you sitting down and doing it or consulting a professional, know that it can be done.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, like, if you can ask your question and you can define the action you're going to take in the same sentence as the question, like that's how you know you're on like the better path of asking a question, as opposed to asking like, was it rain? Like, does rain correlate to the amount of sales we have on a day? And you're like, I can't make it rain. So like,
or the box office returns of a Nick Cage movie, right? That's a famous one that people have correlated with all sorts of crazy things. Yeah, don't go for those questions.
Yeah, so if you can ask a question of like, hey, if our 90-day first 90-day lifetime value is above $112, we're going to increase our cost that we're willing to spend per lead by 20%.
Right.
Like then you can have someone go figure out the answer to your question and you already know what you're going to do, as opposed to be like, cool, it's 112. Now what? Like you don't know what you're going to do.
Right.
And then you have this revisionist history in place where you're like trying to be like, actually it was 150, not 112. Sorry. And so that way you can kind of start that process.
We do have to be careful. Yes, because we can have data that ends up telling us nothing, and we can try to use, divination to figure out that it means something when no, it was never gathered in the proper way. So of course the answer's, garbage in, garbage out.
Uh-huh.
JJ, when we're trying to move to making this data presentable, a couple quick things that we should let folks know about with Data Studio. When I have that data set, am I able to change my mind if I've tried it in one type of graph or chart and I want to try another?
Oh yeah, you can. It's really easy to change the style of things. You literally can just click the drop down from the top menu, and you are like changing it up. So that's not the problem at all. You should be really quick at doing that if you're into the tool.
Yeah. Or if I've got, let's say, 4 charts on the same page. You mentioned the style tab. I can go in, and if I alter the style, it's going to go across all 4 of the objects if I want. It's really easy for me to keep a consistent look and feel to what I'm doing which I don't even think I would try in a spreadsheet.
Exactly. And that's at the end of the day, like the style of what you're delivering can add value. You're actually able to kind of build a rapport with, if you're reporting to clients or reporting to a boss or whomever else, hey, I put the thought and effort into strip away all the data that doesn't matter. And that's where it really shines through, that you know what you're doing, because most people are going to look at like Facebook Business Manager and to show you 36 columns that mean nothing to 95% of people. And
yeah, mean nothing. Or back to what we were talking about with revisionist history, I think the danger is that, look, there's real money being spent on these platforms, and we marketers are only human. So we can sometimes try to divine things that data tool is wedging us into, and we're not actually asking questions on behalf of our business. I found this inside of the Business Manager because it's what they showed me. And I think you'd agree that we ought to begin with our objective and, the foundations of marketing, instead of starting with, well, I saw it when I clicked this tab and down 5 rows and went through this submenu. Right? And Data Studio frees us from that. We're actually looking at the same thing, but we're getting it in a way that we can command how we want it to look.
Yeah, it just depends on the question being asked and how you want to answer it. And that's where, again, we have to start off walking, where people spoon feed you the questions.
Yep.
There's default columns in Business Manager and Facebook. There's default reports in Universal Analytics, and that's half the reason people freak out about GA4 is there's no default reports, right? They're not being spoon fed the actual reports, which is like everyone has to start there with oh wow, I didn't realize you could have like the fall off of this X, Y, or Z, right? And that's, at the end of the day, what matters is that you have an action to take and you know what's happening. There's nothing worse than using an acronym or a style or something else that no one knows what's happening, but you think it looks cool.
Yeah, no, we're trying for clarity here. So no podcast on Data Studio in 2022 is complete without bringing up GA4. So could you tell us a little bit, what were you hinting at when you said there's no default reports in GA4? Does Data Studio have something to do there?
So like by default in GA4, there's very minimal number of like default reports. You can use Data Studio to build those reports or the exploration reports inside of GA4 itself. There are some limitations inside of Data Studio and GA4. You can't access a lot of the parameters with Data Studio. So it's not like a perfect solution by any means.
Right.
It's a perfect solution if you know what questions you're asking and how to kind of surface those. Yep. But if you're just kind of exploring, the exploration reports within GA4 are going to get you there. And then you can start crafting your perfect question to be built out in the future. So that's like, yeah, I've got some kind of bone to pick with GA4 sometimes, but this is the world that we're kind of going into, where you get to ask the better questions up front. And it's going to help people that ask good questions. But then if you don't know what questions to ask, you're going to be a little bit behind. So better questions is going to be where you're going to need to start.
Yes, despite the fact that it seems like more work, it's actually better. It's bringing out the higher and better parts of us in doing our job, rather than mindlessly, taking a screen grab, or, as we said, going into a certain default report just because we know how to get it.
Exactly.
When you look around the internet, and you have absorbed, I know, a lot of information as you have self-taught on this, what resources out there would you point to for people who just want to get a better feel around visualization, or help on how to start using these tools?
Yeah. So for the tools point of view, I actually have a blog called datastudio.vip, which if you want to go check out, it's like I write all the content on there. It's kind of like what we're practicing it over at our agency, right? It's just kind of shared through the voice of JJ. So that's kind of my self plug on that. But then also there are like a lot of original kind of visualization core concepts. And so those core concepts, there's like, it's basically like just UX design kind of is like what you're actually turning into is like user interface design. And so if you just kind of like what I've done in the past year, just Google like the best practices of user experience design and kind of take those into your visualizations, because that is where like that's what you're building, right? Is a user experience for those people. And so that's really helpful as well. And focusing on your business questions, focusing on what the questions are you are asking. Because if you can ask the questions, know how the solution is solved in your head and know how to get the data, like you're now the triple threat of being able to build something quickly, efficiently, and productively without having to go back in circles. But you're going to have circular moments. Like the entire, like I say, first year, I was learning about a lot of Data Studio's stuff. It was trying something, failing, going back to the data collection side, trying again, refailing, and then going again. So there will be some failure.
And this is an important point. Data Studio has not been steady state through that time period. So I think it's important for people who may have, I mean, we've had it for, I think 6, maybe even 7 years now. But I'm one of those people who took an early look at it and just found stuff broken, found missing, what I saw as missing features. Would you encourage people who, had an experience like I did, if they were soured on it, to come back into it today?
Yeah, like it's any software program has ups and downs. Data Studio I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. It's currently free. There's no enterprise plan of it, so there's not even a paid version of Data Studio. So I believe it's kind of what they're going to be utilizing, and it's extremely powerful, and you can do a lot of things. We've built like enterprise level solutions on the platform. So by no means is it like at all like a child's toy in the enterprise level things. Like I've
not anymore
personally enterprise level solutions with Data Studio.
Yeah. Pure opinion here, but I think the new version of Google Analytics, part of the reason why they don't have to worry so much, or they're using like a Data Studio-ish tool within the Explorer, is they want people to get used to these capabilities on their own, because that means fewer Google engineers have to make these reports for us. So that, the story hangs together as far as will it remain free? Will it continue to get new features? Likelihood, right? Because of the economics of maintaining a big analytics platform versus letting people make their own reports, right? The economics argues that they're going to keep giving Data Studio ways for us to use it.
Yeah. And there's always going to be like Google on the block. And if you believe in like Google as a platform, that it's not going to go around. Like I usually trust that more than like the new startup who says they'll do everything at once, right?
Yeah.
And so that's just my take on it. But yeah, that's the state of affairs, I'd say. And if you have any questions, feel free to head over to datastudio.vip and you can shoot me an email there, or join the newsletter. I send them all myself, so it's kind of fun, a little conversation we can have right there.
Yeah. Or if they want to meet the way that we did, LinkedIn, you're very frequently on there and always happy to take invites.
Yeah. LinkedIn also, JJ Reynolds, and I should pop right on up.
Yeah. And I'll throw that in the show notes as well as the link to datastudio.vip. JJ, so thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Glenn. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that everybody is still listening. Hello. And hopefully we can talk again sometime.
You bet. And I'm sure the people came away from this with a way to reboot at least one thing that they're doing in their marketing so that they can make their funnel even better.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.